The morning sun barely broke through the clouds as Elijah woke up with the same empty feeling in his stomach that had become all too familiar. At 12 years old, he was old enough to understand why his mother often skipped meals so he could eat, but not old enough to fix their problems. Their small apartment, located in the forgotten corner of the city, had been without electricity for 3 days now. Elijah rubbed his eyes and looked around the quiet room. His mother had already left for her first job of the day. She cleaned office buildings in the early morning, worked at a laundromat in the afternoon, and 3 nights a week, she served food at a diner across town. Even with all that work, they still struggled to keep up with the bills. "We'll get through this," she had whispered to him last night as they sat in the dark, sharing a package of crackers for dinner. "I get paid on Friday. Just 3 more days, but today..." Elijah couldn't ignore the hunger anymore. He searched through their small kitchen, opening and closing the same empty cabinet several times as if food might magically appear. The refrigerator, now warm and dark without power, contained only a half-empty bottle of ketchup and some spoiled milk. He splashed water on his face, put on his cleanest t-shirt, and grabbed his worn backpack. School wouldn't start for another 2 weeks, but he liked carrying the backpack anyway. It made him feel like he had somewhere important to go. "I'll find something," he told himself, his voice echoing in the empty apartment. Outside, the summer heat already pressed down on the neighborhood. Broken sidewalks lined the street where Elijah lived. Most of the buildings had seen better days, with peeling paint and security bars on windows. But the people here looked out for each other. Old Mr. Washington, who lived next door, waved from his porch where he sat every morning. "Hey, young man, where you headed so early?" He called out. "Just going for a walk," Elijah replied, not wanting to admit he was looking for food. "Well, be careful and don't go too far from the neighborhood." But Elijah had already decided he needed to go far today. Very far. He'd heard his mother talking to her friend about the restaurants on the other side of town, where people spent more on one meal than they spent on food for a whole week. Maybe someone there would help him. The walk took longer than he expected. As the neighborhood changed around him, Elijah felt more and more out of place. The broken sidewalks gave way to clean streets with trees planted in perfect rows. Cars parked along the curb looked shiny and new. People walked with coffee cups in their hands, dressed in clothes that looked like they'd never been worn before. Elijah tried to make himself smaller as he walked, aware of his faded t-shirt and the hole starting to form in his sneakers. Some people glanced at him with curious or concerned expressions, but most just looked past him as if he weren't there at all. After walking for nearly an hour, he reached a street lined with restaurants and fancy shops. The smell of food made his stomach growl so loudly that a woman passing by turned to look at him. Elijah felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He stood across from a restaurant called the Golden Plate, where tables with white tablecloths could be seen through large windows. Men and women in business clothes sat eating meals that looked like art on their plates. Elijah's courage began to fade. What had seemed like a good idea back in his kitchen now felt impossible. These people lived in a different world. Why would any of them help him? Just as he was about to turn back, the door of the restaurant opened, and a tall man in a perfectly tailored dark blue suit stepped out. The man adjusted his gold watch and took a deep breath of the morning air. Something about him caught Elijah's attention. Unlike the other people he'd seen, this man didn't look rushed or distracted. He had a calm, confident way of standing, like someone who was exactly where he belonged in the world. Before he could talk himself out of it, Elijah crossed the street. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might jump out of his chest. The man was checking something on his phone when Elijah approached. "Excuse me, sir," Elijah said, his voice coming out smaller than he intended. The man looked up from his phone, surprised. His eyes, a warm brown color, took in Elijah's appearance without judgment. "Yes? Can I help you?" The man's voice was deep and clear. Now that he was here, Elijah wasn't sure what to say. He had rehearsed asking for money on the walk over, but something told him to be honest instead. "I'm really hungry, sir," Elijah said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning, and I was wondering if you could maybe help me get some food." He expected the man to look annoyed or suspicious, or maybe to just walk away. That's what most adults did when kids from his neighborhood asked for help. But the man did something surprising. He put his phone in his pocket and gave Elijah his full attention. "When's the last time you had a proper meal, son?" he asked. Elijah thought about it. Maybe 4 days ago? Before our power got cut off. The man's expression changed slightly, but Elijah couldn't read it. Was it pity, concern? Whatever it wasn't the dismissal he was used to. What's your name? The man asked. Elijah, he answered, suddenly feeling shy. Well, Elijah, I'm David Thompson, the man said, extending his hand for a handshake. Elijah hesitated for a moment before shaking it, surprised by how normal the gesture felt, like they were just two people meeting for the first time. I was just about to make a few calls, but they can wait, David said. Have you ever eaten at the Golden Plate? Elijah looked at the restaurant behind them and almost laughed. No, sir. I don't think they'd let me in. David smiled, a genuine smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. Well, they'll let you in with me. I happen to know the owner pretty well. Elijah couldn't believe what he was hearing. You want to take me in there? To eat? Why not? Their breakfast is excellent, and I could use some company this morning. Unless you have somewhere else to be? Elijah shook his head, still not fully processing what was happening. Come on then, David said, gesturing toward the door. As they approached the restaurant, Elijah felt his anxiety return. The host at the door, a woman in a crisp black outfit, raised her eyebrows slightly when she saw him. Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Your usual table? She asked, keeping her eyes on David. Yes, thank you, Lisa. My young friend Elijah will be joining me today. The woman's professional smile never wavered, but Elijah could feel her curiosity. Of course. Right this way, gentlemen. Elijah followed David through the restaurant, acutely aware of the stares from other diners. The table they were led to sat by a window overlooking a small garden. The chair felt softer than any Elijah had ever sat in, and the table had more forks and spoons than he knew what to do with. A waiter appeared almost immediately with water and menus. Order whatever sounds good to you, David said. The pancakes here are amazing. Elijah stared at the menu, overwhelmed by the choices and the prices. Everything is so expensive, he whispered. David smiled again. Don't worry about that. This meal is on me. Think of it as my way of starting the day off, right? Still uncertain, Elijah pointed to the pancakes on the menu. These do look good. Excellent choice, David said before ordering pancakes for Elijah and an omelet for himself. When the waiter left, David folded his hands on the table. So, Elijah, tell me about yourself. Where do you live? Are you in school? For a moment, Elijah considered making up a better story about his life. But something about David's direct gaze made him want to tell the truth. I live with my mom in Pine Grove Apartments. It's about an hour's walk from here, he said. I'm supposed to start 7th grade when school begins. My mom works 3 jobs, but we still can't always pay the bills. That's why our electricity got cut off. David listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. He didn't look at his phone once, which surprised Elijah. Most adults couldn't go 5 minutes without checking their phones. And your father? David asked gently. He left when I was 4. Mom says he couldn't handle the responsibility. Their food arrived, and Elijah's mouth watered at the sight of the golden pancakes stacked high on his plate, steam rising from them, with fresh berries and syrup on the side. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen food that looked this good. Go ahead, David encouraged. Enjoy it while it's hot. Elijah tried to eat slowly and use the right fork, but hunger got the better of him. The pancakes were the most delicious thing he'd ever tasted, light and fluffy, melting in his mouth with the sweet syrup. David didn't seem to mind his enthusiasm and ate his own meal quietly, occasionally asking Elijah questions about school and what subjects he liked. I'm good at math, Elijah said between bites, and science. My teacher says I could be an engineer someday. Is that what you want to be, an engineer? David asked. Elijah nodded, his mouth full of pancake. He swallowed and said, I want to build things that help people. Maybe design better apartments so families like mine can have nice places to live without paying too much. Something flickered in David's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or interest. That's a worthy goal, he said. The world needs more people who think about how to help others. As they finished their meal, Elijah felt better than he had in days. His stomach was full, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. This important man in his expensive suit had seen him, really seen him, and treated him like he mattered. Thank you for breakfast, Mr. Thompson, Elijah said as the waiter cleared their plates. I should probably head home now. David checked his watch. Actually, I'd like to meet your mother if that's possible. Is she home now? Elijah's happiness dimmed a little. No, she's at work until 3, and then she has to go to her second job at 5. I see, David said thoughtfully. Well, how about this? I have some meetings this morning, but I could drive you home this afternoon and maybe meet her between her jobs. Would that be okay? Elijah wasn't sure what to think. Why would this rich man want to meet his mother? But David had been nothing but kind, and Elijah found himself nodding. She gets home around 3:30, he said. Perfect, David replied, taking out a business card and writing something on the back. This has my cell phone number. I'll pick you up at the library on Pine Street at 3. Does that work for you? Elijah took the card, feeling like he was being handed something precious. Yes, sir. I'll be there. As they walked out of the restaurant together, Elijah couldn't help wondering what would happen next. This morning, he had just been looking for a meal. Now somehow he felt like his whole life might be about to change. The hours after breakfast seemed to crawl by for Elijah. He spent the morning at the public library, where the air conditioning and free water fountain were almost as welcome as the books. Every now and then he'd take out the business card David had given him and read it again. David Thompson, CEO, Thompson Real Estate Development. The card was thick and smooth, with raised gold letters that caught the light when he turned it. On the back was David's phone number written in neat handwriting. Part of Elijah couldn't believe what had happened that morning. People like David Thompson didn't usually notice people like him, let alone buy them breakfast and offer them rides. What if it was all some kind of joke? Or worse, what if David had bad intentions? His mother had warned him about strangers offering things that seemed too good to be true. But something about David felt genuine. The way he had listened, really listened when Elijah talked about school and his dream of being an engineer. The respect in his voice when he asked questions. The fact that he wanted to meet Elijah's mother instead of just giving him money and sending him on his way. At 2:45, Elijah gathered his things and headed to the meeting spot on Pine Street. His stomach was in knots again, but not from hunger this time. What would his mother think? She was proud and didn't like accepting help from anyone. Would she be angry that he had approached a stranger? Or would she see something in David that Elijah had seen? A chance for something better? The black SUV pulled up right at 3R. Through the tinted windows, Elijah could see David in the driver's seat, talking on his phone. He ended the call as soon as he spotted Elijah waiting on the sidewalk. Right on time, David said with a smile as Elijah climbed into the passenger seat. The car smelled like leather and something clean that Elijah couldn't name. It was the nicest vehicle he'd ever been in. Nothing like the crowded, noisy bus he and his mother took when they needed to go somewhere too far to walk. How was your day? David asked, pulling back into traffic. Good, Elijah replied, suddenly feeling shy again. I stayed at the library and read about famous buildings. They had a book about the guy who designed the Burj Khalifa. That's the tallest building in the world. Adrian Smith. David nodded. Brilliant architect. I've actually been inside the Burj Khalifa. The view from the top is unlike anything you've ever seen. Elijah's eyes widened. You've been to Dubai? Many times. My company has projects in several countries, David said, as if traveling around the world was as normal as going to the grocery store. Maybe someday you'll design something even taller. The idea made Elijah smile. That would be cool. As they drove, David asked more questions about Elijah's life, what his school was like, who his friends were, what he did for fun. Elijah found himself opening up more than he had that morning. There was something easy about talking to David, like they had known each other for years instead of hours. Turn left at the light, Elijah directed as they neared his neighborhood. He felt a twinge of embarrassment as they left the nice part of town behind and entered the area where he lived. The contrast was impossible to miss. Boarded up storefronts, trash in the gutters, people clustered on corners with nowhere else to go. If David was surprised or uncomfortable, he didn't show it. He navigated the streets carefully, following Elijah's directions until they pulled up in front of Pine Grove Apartments, a faded brick building, with bars on the first-floor windows and a chain-link fence surrounding the small patch of dirt that passed for a yard. We're on the 3rd floor, Elijah said, pointing to a window where faded blue curtains hung. The elevator doesn't work most of the time, so we have to take the stairs. David parked the car and turned off the engine. Lead the way, he said, as they walked through the building. Elijah noticed details he usually ignored. The graffiti in the stairwell, the missing light bulbs. the smell of cooking and cleaning products that never quite covered the underlying scent of mold. He tried to see it all through David's eyes and felt a mixture of shame and defensiveness. This wasn't much, but it was home. Mom should be home by now, Elijah said as they reached the 3rd floor. She always comes home to change before her evening job. He knocked on the apartment door before using his key, calling out, "Mom, it's me. I brought someone to meet you." Elijah's mother, Tanya, was standing in the kitchen area when they entered. She looked exhausted, her work uniform wrinkled from a long day of cleaning, but she still had the same warm smile that always made Elijah feel like everything would be okay. That smile faltered when she saw David, confusion and concern crossing her face. "Elijah, what's going on? Who is this?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Before Elijah could answer, David stepped forward and extended his hand. "Mrs. Jackson, I'm David Thompson. I had the pleasure of meeting your son this morning. I hope you don't mind me stopping by like this." Tanya hesitated before shaking his hand, her eyes moving between David and Elijah. "It's Ms. Jackson, actually, and I'm a little confused about why you're here in my home." Elijah jumped in, the words tumbling out. "Mom, I was really hungry this morning, and I walked to the nice part of town, and I asked Mr. Thompson if he could help me get some food, and he took me to breakfast, and he's really nice, and he wanted to meet you." Tanya's expression changed from confusion to something harder to read. She placed a protective hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You went all the way across town by yourself? And approached a stranger?" Her voice was quiet, but Elijah could hear the worry and slight anger beneath it. "I'm sorry, Mom, Please don't be upset with him," David interrupted gently. Elijah showed a lot of courage today. Not many kids his age would have the initiative to solve a problem that way. Tanya straightened her shoulders, her gaze direct. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your kindness to my son, but we're not looking for charity." David nodded, seeming to understand her pride. "Of course. And I'm not here to offer charity. I'm here because I met an exceptional young man this morning who reminds me a lot of myself at his age." The tension in the room shifted slightly. Tanya gestured to the small living area. "Would you like to sit down? I can offer you water, but I'm afraid that's all we have right now. Water would be fine." "Thank you," David said, taking a seat on the worn sofa. Elijah watched as his mother filled a clean glass with tap water and handed it to David. There was an awkward silence as David took a sip and looked around the apartment. Elijah could see him taking in the sparse furniture, the textbooks stacked neatly on a small table, the family photos on the wall, signs of a household that had little but made the most of what they had. "Your son tells me he wants to be an engineer," David said finally. "He seems to have a real passion for it." Tanya's expression softened. "He does. He's always been good with math and science. His teachers say he has real potential." "I believe it," David nodded. "We talked about buildings at breakfast, and his questions showed real insight." Elijah felt a warm glow of pride at the compliment. His mother smiled at him, her earlier frustration fading. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your interest in my son, but I'm still not clear on why you're here," Tanya said, her directness returning. David set down his glass and leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Jackson, I grew up not far from here. My mother worked multiple jobs too, and there were plenty of times when our power was cut off or we didn't have enough to eat. If it hadn't been for a few key people who saw something in me and gave me opportunities, I wouldn't be where I am today." Surprise flickered across Tanya's face. She looked at David more carefully, as if seeing him in a new light. "When Elijah approached me this morning, it was like looking at myself 30 years ago," David continued. "I see the same determination, the same intelligence. I'd like to help, but not with handouts. I believe in creating opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" Tanya asked, her voice cautious but interested. "For starters, my company is looking for an administrative assistant. The position comes with full benefits, including health insurance, and the hours are flexible enough to work around school schedules." David reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, which he placed on the coffee table. "The starting salary is $45,000 a year." Elijah watched his mother's face, seeing the series of emotions that crossed it: disbelief, suspicion, hope, and then a return to caution. "Why would you offer a job to someone you've just met?" she asked. "You don't know my qualifications. I know that you've raised an exceptional young man under difficult circumstances," David replied. "That tells me you're hardworking, responsible, and capable of juggling multiple priorities." all qualities I value in my employees. As for technical skills, those can be taught. Tanya was quiet for a moment, thinking, and what would you expect in return? Just that you do the job well, David said. This isn't charity, Ms. Jackson. It's an opportunity that benefits us both. My company needs good people, and from what I can see, you are one. The suspicion hadn't fully left Tanya's eyes. And Elijah. Where does he fit into this? David smiled. I'd like to mentor him if you're comfortable with that. Help him explore his interest in engineering. Maybe set up a college fund. Why? The question was simple but loaded with meaning. Because someone did it for me, David answered. And because your son had the courage to ask for what he needed. That's rare, Ms. Jackson. Most people, even adults, don't have that kind of courage. Elijah held his breath as his mother considered David's words. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of traffic outside and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Tanya spoke. I'd need to know more about this job. And about you. I can't just jump into something like this, especially when it involves my son. David nodded, seeming to respect her caution. I understand completely. I'd be happy to provide references, company information, whatever you need to feel comfortable, and there's no rush. Take as much time as you want to think about it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, which he placed on the table next to his business card. In the meantime, this should cover getting your electricity turned back on and stocking your kitchen. Consider it an advance on your first paycheck if you decide to take the job. Tanya didn't reach for the envelope. Mr. Thompson, David, please. David, she corrected, this is all happening very fast. This morning, Elijah and I were just trying to make it through another day, and now you're offering to change our lives. It's a lot to process. I understand, David said, standing up. Take all the time you need. My number is on the card. Call me when you're ready to talk more. As David prepared to leave, Elijah found his voice again. Will I see you again, Mr. Thompson? David looked at him with the same genuine smile he'd had at breakfast. I certainly hope so, Elijah. I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a long friendship. After David left, Elijah and his mother sat in silence for a few moments, both trying to make sense of what had just happened. The envelope and business card still sat untouched on the table between them. Mom, Elijah finally asked, do you think he meant it? About the job and everything? Tanya reached out and pulled Elijah close to her side. I don't know, honey. It seems too good to be true, but... She trailed off, looking at the envelope. But what? But sometimes good things do happen, she said softly. Sometimes people surprise you. She reached for the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside was enough cash to pay their overdue electric bill and buy groceries for weeks. Paper-clipped to the money was a note that simply read, This is not charity. This is belief in potential. DT Elijah watched as his mother's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when hope appears in a place where it has been absent for too long. What do we do now? He asked. Tanya took a deep breath and smiled at her son. Now we get our power turned back on. We eat a good dinner. And then we see what tomorrow brings. 3 weeks had passed since David Thompson walked into Elijah and Tanya's lives. The changes in that short time were remarkable. Their apartment now had electricity. The refrigerator was full, and for the first time in years, Tanya didn't wake up in the middle of the night worrying about how they would make it through the next day. After careful consideration and several more conversations with David, Tanya had accepted the job at Thompson Real Estate Development. Today was her 5th day, and Elijah could already see the difference it was making. The constant exhaustion that had shadowed his mother's face for as long as he could remember was beginning to lift. She came home each evening tired but in a different way, satisfied rather than depleted. How was work today? Elijah asked as Tanya set her purse down on the kitchen counter. She was wearing new clothes, nothing fancy but clean and professional, bought with her first paycheck. Good, she said, smiling as she took off her shoes. I'm starting to learn the filing system. And Mr. Lewis from accounting said I picked up the invoice process faster than the last 3 people who had my job. Pride swelled in Elijah's chest. He'd always known his mother was smart and capable, smarter than the jobs she'd been stuck in before. Now other people were seeing it too. That's awesome, Mom. What about the people there? Are they nice to you? A flicker of something, hesitation maybe, crossed Tanya's face before she answered. Most of them are very nice. There are a couple who seem Surprised that Mr. Thompson hired me, but that's normal in any new job. It takes time for people to accept someone new. Elijah understood what she wasn't saying. He'd seen the looks they got when David took them out to lunch last weekend. Surprised that a man like David would be sitting with people like them. He knew his mother must be facing the same at work. "Did you see Mr. Thompson today?" he asked, changing the subject slightly. "Just briefly. He stopped by my desk to see how I was settling in." Tanya moved to the refrigerator and began taking out ingredients for dinner. Real ingredients, not the cheap, processed food they used to rely on. "He mentioned he's picking you up on Saturday morning. Something about a construction site?" Elijah nodded eagerly.
"He's taking me to see the new office building his company is working on downtown."
"He said I could meet some of the engineers and see the blueprints." "That's wonderful, honey." Tanya paused her dinner preparations and looked at her son thoughtfully. "You really like spending time with him, don't you?" "Yeah," Elijah admitted. "He talks to me like I'm smart. Like what I think matters." Tanya came over and kissed the top of his head, something he usually protested he was too old for. But this time, he let it happen. "That's because you are smart, and what you think does matter." The next morning, Elijah woke up early, too excited to sleep. He'd laid out his clothes the night before. His best jeans and a button-up shirt that David had bought him last week when they went shopping for school supplies. By 7:30, he was ready and waiting by the window, watching for David's black SUV. David arrived precisely at 8 a.m. as promised. He always did exactly what he said he would. Exactly when he said he would do it. That reliability was something Elijah had never experienced with an adult man before. "Ready to see some real engineering in action?" David asked as Elijah climbed into the passenger seat. "Definitely." Elijah fastened his seatbelt, noticing the cardboard cup of hot chocolate waiting for him in the cup holder. Another small thoughtfulness that David always seemed to remember. As they drove downtown, David explained the project they were about to see. "This building is going to be different from anything else in the city. We're using sustainable materials and design elements that will cut energy usage by 60% compared to traditional office buildings." "Like solar panels?" Elijah asked, remembering a science class project on renewable energy. "Solar panels, yes, but also much more. The whole structure is designed to maximize natural light and airflow. The outer skin of the building actually responds to weather conditions, adjusting to keep the interior at optimal temperature with minimal energy use." Elijah tried to picture it. "Like the building is alive?" David grinned. "That's exactly right. Like it's alive and intelligent. That's the future of architecture. Buildings that respond to their environment instead of fighting against it." When they arrived at the construction site, Elijah's eyes widened at the scale of the project. Massive steel beams reached toward the sky, forming the skeleton of what would someday be a 20-story tower. Workers in hard hats moved purposefully around the site, and the air was filled with the sounds of machinery and shouted instructions. David grabbed 2 hard hats from the back seat of his SUV. "Safety first," he said, handing the smaller one to Elijah. "Stay close to me and don't touch anything without asking." Elijah nodded solemnly, placing the hard hat on his head. It was a little big, but he adjusted it as best he could, feeling important and grown up. As they walked through the site, David introduced Elijah to various people, the site manager, a few of the construction workers, and finally, a woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, who was studying a set of blueprints spread out on a folding table. "Dr. Chen, I'd like you to meet Elijah Jackson," David said. "Elijah, this is Dr. Lisa Chen, the lead structural engineer on this project." Dr. Chen looked up from her blueprints and smiled at Elijah. "Well, hello there. Mr. Thompson told me he was bringing a future engineer to visit today." Elijah felt his face grow warm at being called a future engineer so matter-of-factly, as if it were already decided. "It's nice to meet you, Dr. Chen. Elijah has some excellent questions about the sustainable features of the building," David said. "I thought you might be able to explain them better than I could." For the next hour, Elijah listened in fascination as Dr. Chen walked him through the blueprints, explaining concepts like passive cooling, gray water recycling, and thermal mass. Some of it went over his head, but she never made him feel stupid for asking questions. Instead, she seemed impressed by his curiosity. "You know," she said as they finished looking at the plans, I was about your age when I decided I wanted to be an engineer. My science teacher gave me a book about bridges and that was it. I was hooked. Did you always know you could do it? Elijah asked. Become an engineer, I mean. Dr. Chen's expression became more serious. No, not always. There weren't many women engineers when I was growing up, especially not Chinese American women. Plenty of people told me I couldn't do it or I shouldn't try. What made you keep going? 2 things, she said, holding up her fingers to count. First, I just loved it too much to give up. And second, I had people like Mr. Thompson here who believed in me when it mattered. Elijah glanced at David, who was talking to another worker a short distance away, giving them space to talk. He believes in me too, Elijah said quietly. I can see that, Dr. Chen nodded. And that's worth more than gold, kid. When someone like David Thompson believes in you, doors open. But remember, he can open the door, but you're the one who has to walk through it. Her words stayed with Elijah as they continued their tour of the site. David showed him the massive foundation, explaining how it had been designed to withstand earthquakes and high winds. He introduced him to the team installing the specialized glass for the windows, glass that would generate electricity while remaining completely transparent. At lunchtime, they sat together on a stack of lumber, eating sandwiches that David had brought in a small cooler. What did you think of Dr. Chen? David asked between bites. She's really smart, Elijah said, and nice. She didn't talk down to me. She's one of the best structural engineers in the country, David nodded. I was lucky to get her for this project. 20 years ago, she was a brilliant young student with a scholarship to MIT, but no money for housing or food. Someone took a chance on her, just like I'm taking a chance on you. Elijah thought about that for a moment. She said you believed in her when it mattered. That's right, David said. And now she's designing buildings that will change how people live and work for generations to come. He looked at Elijah directly. That's how it works, you know. Someone believes in you, helps you up, and then one day you do the same for someone else. It's a chain that goes on forever. After lunch, they visited the trailer that served as the project office. David showed Elijah the 3D computer models of what the finished building would look like, inside and out. On one wall hung a framed sketch, the original concept drawing for the building done in pencil on yellow trace paper. This is how it all starts, David explained, gesturing to the sketch. Just an idea, a vision of something that doesn't exist yet. Then it takes hundreds of people working together to make it real. Could I try drawing something? Elijah asked. David immediately cleared a space at one of the desks and found a pad of paper and a pencil. What would you like to draw? Elijah thought for a moment. A house. But not just any house, a better one. For families like mine. For the next half hour, Elijah sketched while David watched quietly, offering occasional suggestions but mostly letting him work out his ideas on his own. Elijah drew a small apartment building with big windows and a garden on the roof. He added solar panels like the ones Dr. Chen had explained, and spaces where people could grow vegetables. Inside, he designed apartments that were small but efficient, with built-in furniture to save space. When he finished, he pushed the drawing toward David somewhat shyly. It's not very good. I don't really know how to draw buildings properly. David studied the sketch with the same serious attention he gave to professional blueprints. Actually, this is quite good for someone with no formal training. You have instincts about space and light. He pointed to a detail in Elijah's drawing. See how you've oriented the windows to catch the morning sun? That's exactly right. Pride bloomed in Elijah's chest at the praise. Not empty praise, but specific observations about what he'd done well. Can I keep this? David asked, holding up the sketch. Elijah nodded, surprised. Sure, but why? Because someday, when you're a famous architect or engineer, I want to be able to say I have one of your first designs. David carefully rolled up the drawing and secured it with a rubber band. And because you never know, some of these ideas might work their way into our next project. As the afternoon wound down, they took one last walk around the construction site. The workers were beginning to pack up for the day, their voices echoing against the steel and concrete structure. What did you think of your first day on a real construction site? David asked. Elijah looked up at the towering skeleton of the building, imagining what it would become. It's amazing. It's like seeing the future while it's still being built. David nodded, seeming pleased with the answer. That's exactly what it is. And that's what you're doing too, you know. building your future one day at a time. On the drive home, Elijah was quieter than usual, processing everything he'd seen and learned. David didn't push him to talk, comfortable with the silence in a way that reminded Elijah of his mother. When they pulled up in front of the apartment building, David turned to Elijah with a serious expression. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into the back seat. He handed Elijah a backpack, not the worn one he'd been using, but a new one, sturdy and professional looking. "Open it," David encouraged. Inside, Elijah found a set of drafting tools, pencils, a compass, a small ruler, and a notebook with graph paper. There was also a book titled Introduction to Architectural Design, and a tablet computer still in its box. "The tablet has some basic design software loaded on it," David explained. "Nothing too complicated yet, but enough for you to start learning. The book is college level, but I think you can handle it." Elijah ran his fingers over the tools, hardly believing they were his. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're welcome," David said simply. "There's one more thing. Your mother and I have been talking. We've set up a college fund for you. Whatever you earn in school, good grades, academic achievements, we'll match with deposits into the fund. By the time you're ready for college, there should be enough to cover a good engineering program." Elijah looked up, stunned. "Why are you doing all this for us?" David was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Do you remember what I told you about Dr. Chen? About taking a chance on her?" Elijah nodded. "Well, someone took a chance on me too when I was just a hungry kid with big dreams and empty pockets. I promised myself that if I ever made it, I'd do the same for someone else." He looked at Elijah with genuine warmth in his eyes. "You reminded me of that promise the moment you walked up to me outside that restaurant." As Elijah climbed the stairs to his apartment, his new backpack over his shoulder, he felt different somehow, taller, stronger, more certain of his place in the world. His mother was waiting for him, eager to hear about his day. As he told her everything, showing her the tools and the book and the tablet, he realized something important. 3 weeks ago, he had approached David Thompson hoping for a meal. What he'd gotten instead was a future. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning when hunger drove Elijah to approach a stranger for help. Winter had come and gone, and now spring was painting the city with fresh colors. But the changes in the natural world were nothing compared to the transformation in Elijah and Tanya's lives. They no longer lived in the run-down Pine Grove apartments. 2 months ago, they had moved into a modest but clean 2-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood, closer to both Tanya's job and Elijah's school. The rent was reasonable. David had helped them find a place that Tanya could afford on her salary without stretching their budget too thin. He understood the importance of their independence. Elijah stood at the window of their new home, watching the early morning light spill over the small park across the street. In the old neighborhood, he wouldn't have dared to go outside so early. But here, people were already walking their dogs and jogging along the tree-lined paths. "Are you nervous about today?" Tanya asked, coming up behind him and resting her hands on his shoulders. She was dressed for work in a simple blouse and pants, her hair neatly styled, looking more rested and healthy than Elijah could ever remember. "A little," he admitted. Today was the science fair at his new school, the first big academic event since he'd transferred 3 months ago. His project, a model demonstrating how passive solar heating could be incorporated into low-income housing, was the most ambitious thing he'd ever created. "You've worked so hard on your project," Tanya said. "I'm already proud of you, no matter what happens." Elijah nodded, grateful for her support but still feeling the flutter of anxiety in his stomach. His old school had never had the resources for proper science fairs, and the competition at this new school was intimidating. Many of his classmates came from families with parents who were doctors, professors, or engineers, people who could help them create sophisticated projects. "Is Mr. Thompson still coming?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Tanya smiled knowingly. "He called last night after you went to bed to confirm. He's rescheduled his morning meetings to be there." Relief washed over Elijah. Somehow, knowing David would be there made the whole thing less scary. Over the past 6 months, David had become a constant in their lives, not intrusive but steadily present. He took Elijah on educational outings every other weekend, checked in with Tanya regularly about her progress at work, and had become something Elijah had never expected: a friend. The doorbell rang at precisely 7:30 a.m. David was, as always, exactly on time. When Elijah opened the door, he found David holding a cardboard drink carrier with 3 cups and a small bag from the local bakery. "I thought we could all use some breakfast before the big day," David said, stepping inside. He handed Tanya a coffee and gave Elijah his favorite hot chocolate, keeping a coffee for himself. From the bag came 3 fresh pastries, simple but delicious fuel for the morning ahead. David looked around the apartment with approval. "The place looks great. Those bookshelves we built really opened up the space." The bookshelves had been a weekend project a month ago, David teaching Elijah basic carpentry as they constructed custom shelving for the living room. It had been one of Elijah's favorite days, working side by side with David, learning to measure twice and cut once, feeling the satisfaction of creating something useful with his own hands. "Thanks for coming today," Elijah said between bites of his pastry. David looked surprised. "I wouldn't miss it. This is your first science fair. That's a big deal." "It's just a school event," Elijah shrugged, trying to downplay his anxiety. "It's never just anything when you put your heart into it," David replied. He glanced at his watch. "We should head out soon if we want to get your project set up properly." The drive to school was filled with easy conversation, David asking questions about the science fair format, and Tanya sharing stories from her week at work. Elijah sat in the back seat, his project carefully secured beside him, listening to the 2 adults talk. There was something comforting about their voices, about the way they had developed their own friendship independent of him. When they arrived at the school gymnasium, it was already buzzing with activity. Students and parents moved between rows of tables, setting up elaborate displays and making last-minute adjustments. Elijah felt a momentary panic at the sight of some of the other projects. They looked so professional, so perfect. "Deep breath," David said quietly, noticing Elijah's expression. "Remember, it's not about having the fanciest display. It's about understanding your subject and communicating it clearly." With David carrying one end of his display board and Elijah the other, they made their way to his assigned table. Tanya followed with the box containing his model house, her face a mix of pride and her own nervousness on her son's behalf. As they set up the display, Elijah noticed other students looking their way, or more specifically, looking at David. It wasn't every day that the CEO of Thompson Real Estate Development showed up at a middle school science fair. David was becoming well known in the city, not just for his business success but for his growing philanthropic work. "Ignore them," David advised, seeing Elijah's discomfort at the attention. "Focus on what you're here to do." Once everything was arranged to Elijah's satisfaction, Tanya checked her watch. "I have to get to work, honey, but I'll be back for the awards ceremony this afternoon." She hugged him tightly. "You're going to be amazing." After she left, David helped Elijah run through his presentation one last time. They had practiced it dozens of times over the past few weeks, refining his explanation of how the model worked and why its principles mattered. "Remember, connect it to real people," David reminded him. "The judges don't just want to know how it works. They want to know why it matters." When the judges began making their rounds, David stepped back, giving Elijah space to present on his own. From a distance, he watched as Elijah stood tall before the panel of science teachers and local engineers, explaining his model with growing confidence. Through the morning, David stayed nearby, offering encouragement between judging sessions but never interfering. He watched as other students and parents came to look at Elijah's project, noting the respect in their expressions as Elijah explained concepts that many adults would struggle to understand. During a quiet moment, when most people were taking a lunch break, a tall man in a tweed jacket approached David. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Dr. Williams, head of the science department. I wanted to thank you for coming today." David shook his hand. "It's my pleasure." "Elijah has worked very hard on his project." Dr. Williams nodded. "It shows. It's one of the most thoughtful entries we've seen today." He hesitated, then added, "If you don't mind my asking, how are you connected to Elijah? I know he's new to our school." For a moment, David considered how to answer. Their relationship didn't fit into any simple category. "I'm a friend of the family," he said finally, "and a believer in Elijah's potential." The science teacher smiled. "Well, your belief appears well placed. We're very glad to have him at our school." As the teacher walked away, David caught Elijah watching their interaction from across the room, a question in his eyes. David gave him a thumbs up, and Elijah's face broke into a relieved smile. The afternoon passed quickly, and soon it was time for the award ceremony. Tanya arrived just in time, slipping into the seat David had saved for her near the front. "How did it go?" she whispered anxiously. "He was brilliant," David replied simply. The principal began announcing winners in various categories: honorable mentions, third places, second places. Elijah sat with the other students, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. When they got to the overall middle school division awards, Tanya reached over and squeezed David's arm nervously. "Third place in the middle school division goes to..." The principal paused for effect. "Leah Patterson for her work on water purification systems." A girl a few rows ahead of Elijah stood up to accept her certificate, beaming with pride. "Second place in the middle school division goes to..." Another dramatic pause. "Elijah Jackson for his sustainable housing model." For a moment, Elijah seemed frozen in place, as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. Then, with a gentle nudge from the student next to him, he stood and made his way to the stage. Tanya's eyes filled with tears as she watched her son accept the award. His posture straight, his face solemn but glowing with quiet pride. David felt an unexpected tightness in his own throat. He had known Elijah was capable of this, had seen the potential in him from that first conversation over pancakes, but seeing it recognized publicly was something else entirely. As Elijah returned to his seat, clutching his certificate and the small trophy that came with second place, David thought about how far they had come in 6 months. From a hungry boy asking for food to a confident young scientist, being recognized for his intellect and hard work. The transformation wasn't magic. It was what happened when opportunity met preparation and determination. After the ceremony, as they packed up Elijah's project, a reporter from the local newspaper approached them. She had been covering the science fair and had been impressed by Elijah's project. "Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about your work?" she asked Elijah. "We're doing a feature on the fair winners for Sunday's edition." Elijah looked uncertainly at David and Tanya, who both nodded encouragingly. "Sure," he said, straightening his shoulders a little. The reporter smiled and took out her notebook. "Can you tell me what inspired your project on sustainable housing?" Elijah took a deep breath, just as David had taught him before making a presentation. "I used to live in an apartment where we couldn't afford to keep the heat on in winter. I wanted to design something that would help families like mine. A house that stays warm without costing a lot of money to heat." The reporter's expression softened. "That's a very practical application of science. And how did you learn about passive solar design?" Elijah glanced at David. "My mentor taught me about it. He's an expert in sustainable building." "Your mentor?" The reporter looked curiously at David. "Mr. Thompson has been helping me study engineering and architecture," Elijah explained. "He believes in me." The simple statement hung in the air for a moment, its power transcending the scientific achievement they were there to celebrate. As they drove home that evening, Elijah's certificate carefully tucked into his backpack, David asked, "How does it feel to be an award-winning scientist?" Elijah grinned, his earlier nervousness completely gone. "Pretty good. But you know what feels even better?" "What's that?" "Knowing that my project might actually help people someday. Real people like me and Mom before." "Before what?" David prompted gently when Elijah trailed off. "Before you," Elijah finished quietly. "Before you believed in us." In the front passenger seat, Tanya turned to look back at her son, then at David. "We believed in ourselves," she said softly. "We just needed someone else to believe in us too." David kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was thick with emotion when he finally spoke. "That's how it works. We lift each other up. Today it's me helping you. Tomorrow it will be Elijah helping someone else." As they pulled up to the apartment building, Elijah noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small sign on the building next door announcing a new development. "Future home of Thompson Community Center. Education, resources, opportunity. Is that your company's project?" he asked David, pointing at the sign. David nodded. "It's something new we're working on. A place where kids can come after school to learn about science, technology, engineering, and math. A place where people can access resources to help them improve their lives." Tanya looked at him with sudden understanding. "This isn't just about us, is it?" This was never just about Elijah and me. No, David admitted. It's about changing the pattern. It's about creating a chain reaction of opportunity. He turned to look at them both. And it all started with a brave young man who asked for what he needed. As they walked into the apartment building together, Elijah held his science fair award a little higher, feeling not just pride in what he had accomplished today, but hope for all the tomorrows that stretched before him, tomorrows that had once seemed so limited but now felt full of infinite possibility. 5 years had passed since that life-changing morning when a hungry, 12-year-old boy had approached a wealthy stranger for food. 5 years of growth, challenges, triumphs, and transformation. Now, at 17, Elijah stood tall and confident in a pressed blue shirt and khaki pants, waiting in the wings of the auditorium stage. Through the curtain, he could see hundreds of people filling the seats. Business leaders, educators, families from across the city, reporters from local news outlets, and even a crew from a national television network. They had all come for the grand opening of the Thompson Foundation's headquarters and the launch of its ambitious new initiative. Nervous? David asked, coming to stand beside him. At 53, David Thompson had a few more silver streaks in his hair than when they'd first met, but his eyes still held the same warmth and determination. Elijah smiled. A little. It's a big crowd. Just remember why we're here, David said, straightening Elijah's already straight collar in a gesture that had become familiar over the years. This isn't about impressing anyone. It's about sharing what we've learned so it can help others. Elijah nodded, taking a deep breath. Through the gap in the curtain, he spotted his mother sitting in the front row. Tanya Jackson was no longer an exhausted woman working 3 jobs to barely survive. Now she was the operations director for the Thompson Foundation, responsible for turning visions into reality. Her natural organizational skills and unwavering work ethic had propelled her up through the company over the past 5 years, surprising everyone except David, who had seen her potential from the beginning. The lights dimmed, and the audience quieted as the program began. David squeezed Elijah's shoulder once before walking onto the stage to applause. 5 years ago, David began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I was leaving a restaurant after a business breakfast when a young man approached me and asked for food. That seemingly small moment changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. From the wings, Elijah watched as David told their story, not as a savior narrative, but as a story of mutual transformation. He spoke about how mentoring Elijah had reconnected him with his own past, with the struggles of his childhood and the people who had helped him overcome them. What began as a simple meal grew into a friendship, and that friendship sparked an idea. David continued, what if we could create a systematic way to identify potential in unexpected places? What if we could build bridges between those who have resources and those who need opportunity? What if we could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities? On the screen behind him, images appeared. The community center that had opened next to Elijah's apartment building 3 years ago. The scholarship program that had sent dozens of bright students to college. The job training initiative that had helped hundreds of adults find meaningful employment. Today, we're launching the next phase of this vision, David announced. The Believers Network, connecting mentors with the young people who will shape our future. And to tell you more about it, I'd like to introduce someone who knows firsthand the power of having someone believe in you. Please welcome Elijah Jackson, the young man whose courage 5 years ago set all of this in motion. Elijah took another deep breath and walked onto the stage, accepting the microphone from David. The lights were bright, making it hard to see the audience clearly, but he knew his mother was watching, along with his friends from school and the mentoring program. When I was 12 years old, Elijah began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. My family was struggling. We had no electricity, no food in our refrigerator, and seemingly no way out. Out of desperation, I walked to the wealthy part of town and asked a stranger for help. He paused, looking at David with a smile. That stranger turned out to be more than just a source of a meal. He became a mentor, a friend, and a catalyst for change, not just for me, but for my mother and eventually for hundreds of other families in our city. Elijah turned back to the audience. But this story isn't really about me or Mr. Thompson. It's about what happens when opportunity meets potential. It's about what becomes possible when someone believes in you before you fully believe in yourself. On the screen behind him, a new series of images appeared. Young people working with mentors on science projects, art portfolios, business plans, and community initiatives. The Believers Network is built on a simple idea, Elijah continued. Find the spark in someone and fan it into a flame. Over the past 2 years, we've piloted this approach with 50 young people from across the city. Today, I'm proud to announce that all 50 are either enrolled in college, engaged in specialized career training, or have launched their own community improvement projects. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience. But we're just getting started, Elijah said, his voice growing stronger. With the partnerships we're announcing today, the Believers Network will expand to reach 500 young people in the coming year. And within 5 years, we aim to create mentorship opportunities for every interested student in our city's public schools. The auditorium erupted in applause. When it quieted, Elijah continued more softly, more personally. I stand before you today as living proof that a single act of kindness, followed by sustained belief and support, can completely alter the trajectory of a life. 5 years ago, I was a hungry kid with dreams I didn't think would ever come true. Today, I'm a high school senior with a full scholarship to MIT, where I'll study architecture and urban planning starting this fall. More applause filled the room, and Elijah saw his mother wiping away tears in the front row. But the most important thing I've gained isn't material success or educational opportunity, Elijah said. It's the understanding that we all have the power to change each other's lives. We all can be the person who says, I believe in you when it matters most. As Elijah wrapped up his speech, introducing the next speaker, the mayor, who would announce the city's partnership with the foundation, he felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun 5 years ago with a desperate request for food was widening to encompass an entire community. After the ceremony, as people mingled at the reception, Elijah found himself surrounded by well-wishers, teachers from his school, fellow students from the mentoring program, business leaders interested in supporting the foundation. He answered questions politely but felt a growing need for a moment of quiet. Slipping away from the crowd, he found a small balcony overlooking the city. The afternoon sun cast a golden light over the buildings, including the Thompson Tower downtown, the sustainable building he had visited as a 12-year-old, now completed and serving as a model for eco-friendly urban development. The door opened behind him, and he turned to see his mother and David joining him on the balcony. There you are, Tanya said, coming to stand beside him at the railing. Everyone's looking for you. You're the star of the day. Elijah shook his head. I'm just one part of something much bigger. That's true, David agreed, but your part matters. You were the catalyst, Elijah. Never forget that. The three of them stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over the city they were helping to transform. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Elijah asked finally. That first day when I asked you for food, did you have any idea what would come of it? David considered the question. No, he admitted. I just knew I was supposed to help you. The rest unfolded one step at a time. He turned to look at both of them. That's how the best journeys go, I think. You can't see the whole path from the beginning. You just have to take the first step and trust that it's leading somewhere important. Tanya smiled, putting an arm around her son's shoulders. And now you're taking another first step, college, MIT, a whole new chapter. I'm a little scared, Elijah confessed. It's so far from home from everything I know. That's natural, David said. But remember, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. You've been doing that since you were 12 years old. A staff member appeared at the door looking apologetic for interrupting. Mr. Thompson, the governor just arrived and is asking to speak with you. And Elijah, there's a reporter from the Education Channel who'd like to interview you about the mentorship program. Duty calls, David said with a small smile. Ready to go back in? Elijah nodded, but before they turned to leave, he impulsively pulled both his mother and David into a hug. Thank you, he said simply. For everything. No, David replied, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for having the courage to ask for what you needed. You taught me more than I ever taught you. As they walked back into the reception, Elijah thought about all the lives that had been changed because of that one desperate moment 5 years ago. Not just his own and his mother's, but David's too, and now hundreds of others through the foundation's work. Later that evening, after the crowds had gone, and the three of them were sharing a quiet dinner at the apartment, Elijah brought out a small gift-wrapped box. What's this? David asked, surprised. Just a small thank you, Elijah said, suddenly shy. For everything. David carefully unwrapped the box and opened it. Inside was a framed photograph of the three of them at Elijah's middle school science fair, the day he had won second place with his sustainable housing model. Beneath the photo was an inscription, "To the man who showed me that believing in someone is the greatest gift you can give." With gratitude, Elijah. David stared at the photo for a long moment, uncharacteristically lost for words. You saved us, Tanya said quietly, breaking the silence. Not just with money or a job, but with belief. David shook his head firmly. No, I may have opened a door, but you both walked through it on your own strength. All I did was what anyone should do when they see potential. I invested in it. Well, your investment paid off, Elijah said with a smile. And now we're going to help others make the same kind of investment. As the evening wound down, Elijah found himself thinking about all the other kids out there. Kids with empty refrigerators and big dreams. Kids who just needed someone to see their potential and believe in them. Thanks to the foundation, more of those kids would find the support they needed. The ripple effect that had begun with his simple request for food would continue to spread, touching lives he would never even know. 5 years ago, hunger had driven him to approach a stranger. Today, a different kind of hunger drove him. The desire to create a world where every child with potential had the opportunity to fulfill it. It was a hunger he now had the tools to satisfy. One life at a time, one believer at a time, one transformation at a time, and it had all begun with 6 simple words spoken on a desperate morning. Excuse me, sir. I'm really hungry.